So I think we will make a start. So really warm welcome again. My name is Marika. I work at UnLtd in our volunteering and pro bono team, and one of the forms of support that we offer to social entrepreneurs is this webinar series that you are now taking part in. Today's webinar is actually the final one in the 2014 series, and we're really pleased to welcome one of our partners who we've done other work with, but not webinars before, PA Consulting, to join us in hosting this. Our webinar will focus on, really, I suppose, in a word, on selling. PA Consulting use the term creating opportunities, and they'll be saying much more about that throughout the webinar. But really, this is about developing your sales pipeline and your sales techniques as much as you can do in 45 minutes. I mean, we know at UnLtd that one of the toughest challenges, probably for every social entrepreneur, is to actually generate income, is to identify their paying client and then converting that into income for their social venture, to be able to create the social impact that you want to create. So hopefully this topic will be relevant, and you'll find some of the tools and techniques that PA Consulting share with you really valuable. Some practicalities before we get started. The webinar, we've got until 1 o'clock. Webinar will last about 45 minutes in terms of content, and then we'll take questions. So please post questions through your chat function, and I will pick those up at the end, and I will read them out to Adam and Conrad, who are hosting this from PA's side. I think that's it. We are recording the webinar, so we'll be sending you the recording afterwards, so you can revisit anything that you might have missed. And that's, yeah, I think that's all. So really warm welcome to Adam Stringer and Conrad Thompson from PA Consulting, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit more detail. So over to you guys.
So, good morning, everyone. So thank you, Marika, for the introduction. As Marika mentioned, this webinar is about, in a word, selling. We'd like to talk a little bit about what we understand here by the word selling, which is slightly more than just putting in a proposal or an application or pitching for some business. So we're going to talk through the whole sales process briefly. We've divided the webinar into 2 parts. The first part will be about that sales process, if you like, and the wider approach that you can take towards winning business. And the second part, recognizing that there's quite a number of you that will no doubt be having to write proposals, either to try and sell your product or to gain funding, will be some practical tips for actually writing proposals. So kind of two quite distinct parts to the webinar. The first part will probably go through fairly slowly, whereas the second part, there's quite a lot of material to get through, and it's really quite short, sharp, practical tips. We'll then follow into the questions and answers. So why do we feel qualified to talk to you about selling? Well, we've been delivering client work for about 75 years now, I think it is, and I think the thing that makes us qualified is that it's a competitive marketplace, and we have to win our work. So either through competition with other consultancies, or through kind of informal selling processes, or extending work, or recognizing opportunities, we have to win our work before we can deliver it. And so a kind of key part of our operation, if you like, is focused around creating opportunities and selling work. And we train all of our consultants quite comprehensively in the processes and the techniques for selling, and we'll go a little bit further into that in a moment. You might also be asking, you know, is there a comparison between winning the kind of work that we're trying to win and what you're doing? So, you know, either selling your social enterprise products and goods, or bidding for funding applications. And I think there is, because I think, you know, it's a competitive marketplace in both cases. It's quite difficult. So selling can be quite difficult, particularly when you're trying to sell something that's intangible. Perhaps it's an approach or a scheme or a new idea. but I think the other comparison, and we'll come on to this later, is that people do buy people. So this is not just about selling your organization and your products and your services. It's about making the sales process as personal as possible and about getting interaction with those that you're trying to sell to. So this leads us on to part one of the webinar, which Conrad is going to talk us through. And as I say, this is about the broad process of selling work and creating opportunities. I'll hand over to Conrad now.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Conrad Thompson. I've been at PA about 14 years, and I've had a role doing business development ever since I joined. I'm a recently promoted senior partner, in fact, partly on the basis of my track record in selling work to our clients. And I also sponsor our, what we call creating opportunities, what others would call kind of selling or prospecting course within PA. And just to give you a sense, as a firm, we're about 2,500 people. Of those, I guess about half are actively involved in business development. So we've got a pretty big community that we rely on, essentially, for us to win the work that we can then deliver against and win some of those awards we talked about. So first of all, this concept of business development or selling, I think it's important just to bust a few myths first. For people that are sort of new to this area, you know, sometimes people have a kind of concept of the double glazing salesperson or the slightly dodgy second-hand car salesperson. And I think, first of all, it's quite important to sort of realize the nature of the people that do business development. So myth one, you know, are these people all, you know, larger than life, boisterous, extrovert? And in my experience, absolutely not. My view is that anyone can be a great business developer or salesperson, and actually a lot of the skills are the core skills that most of us would look to develop through our natural day-to-day life. Good listening skills, you know, being creative, being able to communicate really strongly. Those are the skills that good business developers need. Secondly, is making a sale easy? Absolutely not. You know, most of us are working in a competitive market. So when we think about business development, you know, I find it helpful to imagine, you know, other people sitting in similar offices, talking about the same opportunity, working out how they're going to win it. You know, it's a competitive world, and in order to win, you have to be better than the competition. And that takes a whole set of things, capabilities, tools, techniques, often great teamwork being one of the most important ones, and quite a bit of effort. And lastly, people often sort of say, well, do I need a process? You know, can't I just go out and do this? And again, my experience is absolutely not. You need to have a systematic approach to how you are identifying, prioritizing, focusing in on, and securing new sales. So that's a couple of myths around business development. I mentioned I sponsor creating opportunities in PA. One of the things we do is get guest speakers to come in over a dinner as part of the training and get them just to talk about their experience of business development. And these are just a few quotes from some of the people both within PA and outside PA that we've had the pleasure of engaging with. And I'll just pull out a couple of these because I think some of them are quite helpful. The top left one, consider what is the value beyond first-class execution. So what does that mean? What that means is this guy is a guy that does a lot of corporate finance work. And in his world, doing the deal is a pretty commodity service. So they expect you to be able to do the deal. You know, similarly, I'm imagining the sort of organizations that many of you talk to, they would expect you to be able to do the thing that you claim to do. It's not a differentiator. It's almost an obvious thing. So you really need to focus in on the value you're going to bring over and above the core offer that you're making in the market. So really thinking through. As an example, these guys can spend up to a year shaping a proposition that they're going to take to a client to the point of, working out two companies that they think should merge, working out what the structure is, working out who the top management team, potentially even lining up new CEOs. So they spend a huge amount of effort prior to then presenting an idea to the client. The second one I'll pick up is this one on the top right-hand side. So again, this is a real story from a guy that was pitching to a very large organization. And he had a view that they had a great offer, but in order for this to land, he had to talk to the chairman. So he turned up at this large organization, multinational organization, on a Monday and said, "I'd like to speak to your chairman, please." And the receptionist said, "Great, have you got an appointment?" And he said, "No." And she said, "Well, you know, Mr. So-and-so is quite busy at the moment." And he said, "I'll wait." So he waited at reception. And over time, people kind of asked him, "What are you doing here?" "I'm waiting to see the chairman." "Why do you want to see?" By day 3, he finally got a meeting with the chairman. 2 weeks later, he sold a piece of work. So, you know, persistency is really key. I'm not saying you need to go to quite that extreme. A couple of the other ones here, just very quickly. Organizations find information valuable. So if you can bring information, that's really useful. Being a cavalier, not a roundhead, that's all about being quite creative about how you do things. If you think about your own experience and people selling to you, it's really great when people can be a bit more creative, think outside the box to help you buy a product or service. Thinking about who you might introduce these people to is really important. And positioning the client to say yes is key. And I'll just use that as a link onto the next slide. So that's a little bit about what the experts say. The next slide is really about the process. So I talked about needing a process. I'll come back to the imagery of a parachute in a little while. But if you look at the right-hand side, this is one of the typical way that organizations think about how an opportunity goes through a pipeline, often the phrase used. So you start off with a lead. You know, you think the client's got a need that you can satisfy. That moves into an opportunity where the client's thinking that along with you there's something that you might be able to do for them. Then you get a proposal, or they ask for your proposal, and then you make the sale. But actually that's quite an internal or a seller's view on the process. I find it's really helpful to think about this through the customer's view. And typically what they go through is quite a different thought process, the same stages but a different thought process. So the first is they have an idea. They have an idea. Oh yeah, we might want to, you know, offer a grant in this area. We might want to procure some services in this space. Then they develop some interest in that idea. They sort of expand upon it. Then they get to the point of saying, yeah, I think I'm going to do something. I've got a real intent. And then they make a decision. So the analogy I'll use here is my daughter, who was 16 a little while ago, and came to me with the idea of, "Dad, why don't you and I do a parachute jump?" So that's where the idea came from. Then over the next few weeks, excuse me, I developed the interest. I looked at some websites, talked to some people, got to the point where I was thinking, yeah, maybe I could do this. You know, we could do a jump together. So I got an interest. Then I started moving to an intent where I'd nailed it down to 2 or 3 companies. I realized I was going to do a single jump with me strapped against someone else. I realized how much it was going to cost. And then at the back of that, I made a decision. So I think it's really important that when you're thinking about selling, what you're really doing is helping the client or the person that's buying from you go through that process in the most effective way possible. So our role as business developers is not to sell something. Our role is to help people buy the services that we think are right for them. And sometimes that can mean suggesting that they don't buy the services that we provide, but they should do something else. And I think being that honest about what you are selling is not a push, but it's helping them get a pull in terms of what they want. So that's a little bit about the process. The next few slides are really 3 techniques that I've found most useful and people that I talk to find most useful as a way of, well, that's great, Conrad, but how do you do this in practice? So the first is something called SPIV. This is actually developed by an organization called Huthwaite in the 70s on the back of lots of research that they did. And it's quite a simple 4-step process that's really useful to move clients away from having nice conversations to a point where they realize they might actually want to do something. And it's a simple 4-step process. You start off with some situation questions. So you just get the lie of the land in terms of where is the client, what are their issues today, what are they trying to do, what does their business look like. And that just helps you get an understanding of the current situation. Then you move into probing problem questions or opportunity questions. So teasing out why a change is needed, why they might want to do something different, why might they want to set up a grant in a particular area, why might they want to buy your services. So that the person then reveals their implied need. So they've got something that is in their head that they're starting to, oh yeah, it will be useful if I could have that. They've got an implied need. What people often do is then immediately leap to an answer. They immediately leap to, right, if you've got an implied need, I've heard a problem, here's the answer to your problem. And what they miss out is the crucial next step. So the next step is asking some implication questions. And the implication questions tease out the effect or consequence of that need. So what you're trying to do is get them to articulate how important it is to resolve that need. What would it mean to them? And ideally what you're trying to do is quantify that need. So, if you're offering training services, that they might have talked about the need and brought, oh yeah, it would be helpful to have my people to be better trained up in a particular area. So that's the problem, there's an implied need. You then get into implication questions. Well, what would be the implication if they all were even better at this? Or what's the implication if they didn't improve? So what you get through those implication questions is some value questions or payoff questions. So you get people to then articulate the value. Well, actually, I think we could generate 20% improvements in customer satisfaction. I think we could resource the same amount of level with 15% less people. Whatever it is, you get to a value statement which allows the person to then state some explicit needs. So you move from an implied need saying, I'd like some training, to an explicit need, which is, I think I could improve my productivity by 20%, or I think I could grow my business by 30% if I had this training. So you've gone from something that's implied to something that's explicit. This technique I would encourage you to use. It's a really helpful approach to kind of question and answers that will help you work out and allow you to get your clients through this sort of helping them by teasing out the real needs that they have. So that's one technique. The next technique that I use and I come across all the time is the difference between features, advantages, and benefits. If I bring this to life with an example, so what I see a lot of the time when I read a lot of frankly, sometimes internal proposals, but certainly other proposals that I see. People often talk about the features of the product or the features of the service. Occasionally they'll talk about the advantages. But what they miss is talking about the real benefit to the client. So if I just expand on that, if you take a plastic cup, so you can quite easily describe the facts or characteristics. It's round, it's light, it's made of plastic, it's got a closed environment that all the plastic is joined up. That's the facts or characteristics. Then you might describe advantages. Well, you can put liquids in it. It's light, so you can move it easily. You can quickly and easily dispose of it. So those are some advantages. When you get to benefits, it's the next level up. So you talk about benefits in terms of, so what's the benefits of that? Well, you can hold a drink of water in it. You know, you can reduce your cost of transportation. If it's a plastic cup and you're into plastic recycling, you know, it's very low cost to recycle. But you can quite quickly see that those benefits start getting specific to a need. So if the need is, I want a hot drink, then a plastic cup, unless it's specifically designed for heat, doesn't meet that benefit. If you're working at a company that values recycling and wants to clean cups, then they would want a plastic or china cup and a glass or china cup. And if you deliver them a plastic cup, that doesn't meet their need. So the key distinction is you can only articulate a benefit when you've got a client need. Without a client need, the best you can do is talk about features and advantages, which is why the previous technique that I talked about, the spears technique, is so useful, because what it does is it allows you to elicit from your client the benefit that they are after, and that then allows you to position your offering in context of the benefits that they're looking after. So it allows you to move away from describing features and advantages to being able to describe benefits that will resonate for the client. The third area that I wanted to just cover off is the difference between a kind of solution and an approach. Very often, particularly in the consulting world, you know, clients come to us with problems. And when they've described those problems, and ideally we've done a great job in eliciting, well, what's your real need and benefit, and we've described and can describe our offer in terms of benefits, we then move into, so what are we going to do? And all too often we find ourselves describing that as a process, an approach, a set of things that we would do. And what you really need to do is, first of all, draw out a solution to their problem. How are we going to fix that problem? So just coming back to my analogy of a parachute jump, you know, the process is, well, you'll come along to us on the day, we'll give you a briefing, we'll then strap you into someone, we'll take you up on a net, you know, that's the process. The solution is a tandem dive from 9,000 feet. That's the solution they're offering. And the approach or the process is how you get to that. And in my experience, all too often, particularly when you're selling kind of services rather than products, people too quickly get to the process steps and don't think carefully enough of what the solution is we're actually offering to the organization. So I've got a kind of definition here where really the solution is all about the answer to a problem, whereas the approach is more the method. Proposal is the plan, and then the pitch. So those are hopefully three useful techniques that we've used and train a lot of our people in helping them drive out benefits, walk through a process, and focus in very much on helping clients buy rather than us selling. I'm now going to hand over to Adam to talk a bit more about writing winning proposals.
Thank you, Conrad. Okay, so recognising that Conrad's been through some of the early stages of shaping an opportunity, I realise that many of you might be sitting on a proposal or an application for funding, and you just need to get on with it. So the second part of this webinar is going to talk about the practical tips that we've developed for writing winning proposals. So what is a compelling proposal? Well, this quote here I think is quite useful. So the skill of writing a compelling proposal is to create a context into which other people can think. So really you are trying to provoke some thought in the customer or in the grant giving organisation, and that thought might be, well, I didn't realise we could approach this in that way. That's a really new idea. Or, you know, I just have to give those people money. But you are trying to allow them space to think, which means you don't necessarily have to give them all of the answer. And I think that's important. It should be really clear. I think this is, you know, this is very basic but absolutely fundamental. I see lots of proposals that are usually very lengthy, can be quite badly written, and I get to the end and I think, well, I don't really understand what the solution is there. I don't understand what you're offering me. You'd have been better to cut the last 20 pages and focus on clarity up front. So yeah, these are kind of overriding thoughts for your proposal. I just want to go through the underpinning logic of a proposal before we move into some tips. Now, we think there are 8 elements to writing a proposal, and particularly if you've been asked to write a proposal and it's an open, the organisation are eliciting an open response rather than some kind of web form or prescribed response, it might be quite useful to actually list these 8 elements down and draft your proposal against each of them. You can always change the titles later into something more interesting, but if you use these 8 elements, you'll at least have the structure of a well-formed proposal. And these 8 elements are the opening, the needs, the issue, the approach, the solution, the capability, and the budget and impact before the close. I'm going to run through each of the 8 fairly quickly, because I think the most useful thing is knowing that there are these 8 and you can kind of use them as a structure. So the opening, well, the aim of the opening is to set your whole proposal up and make sure that the recipient really understands the key message. Your opening should be quite short, in my opinion. We often open our proposals with an executive summary, which is usually 3 to 4 paragraphs and fits on a sheet of A4. A way in which you might form your opening, and typically people write their opening last, actually, so once they've been through all the rest of the stages. Think about what you would say to someone in a lift or an elevator if you're from the States. And if you can't describe your kind of opening in a kind of 1 to 2 minute period of time, you probably haven't formed enough kind of clarity around the opening statement. Some people even go as far as describing their opening, recording it on a dictaphone, and then typing it back, because we tend to talk with much more clarity and much more emotion, actually, than we do when we come to write something down. So that's just some tips for your opening. Your opening should be really interesting as well. It's the first thing that the recipient is going to read. In my opinion, it's the most important part of the proposal. So, you know, summary of what's really distinctive about your proposal, and also just a hint as to the structure of the rest of the proposal. Now, that isn't to say I would list out the remaining 7 bullet points and say, I'm going to take you through this, that, and the other. But, you know, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I think this is important for your organisation and the solution that we've got to your problem. Yeah, something like that can be quite useful. Just talk briefly about the need. So the aim of the need is really to clarify with the recipient that you've really understood, as Conrad described earlier, the explicit need. And there's a number of ways of doing this. Quite typically, we just play back to the customer or the client what we've heard them say. If you're writing for a specific grant or a funding organisation, perhaps they have a set of values or a purpose against which they award grants. So you might recognise the need by playing back some of their values. You know, I understand why you exist. I understand the type of work that you're seeking to commission. I understand the proportions in which you're going to give out grants and how you do that. You can sometimes use quantitative, you know, figures to illustrate that you've understood. So, you know, it can be quite useful to sort of say, I understand that you've got a pot of X amount to give out, and this is going to be split between several organisations. I feel I fit under your values in this space, and therefore I think I qualify. So you're really, quite a lot of the time, you're showing that you qualify to respond to a need. Next stage is the issues. So really you're showing awareness of as we say here, awareness of of what can screw up and how we might handle this situation. So what typically happens when someone's reading a proposal is they start to think about all of the issues or problems that they've got with your response. And I think if you can tackle them explicitly up front, that can be quite helpful. So even before you've gone into the approach, you recognize the difficulty in the situation. Now that's quite a broad term. Perhaps that's the difficulty of the problem that this grant-giving organisation are trying to solve. If it's, for example, improving the quality of care in the NHS, you could highlight all of the issues and problems that you feel make this a difficult challenge to solve before you've even talked about how your solution helps. Moving on, so as I say here, so these are the hooks really. This is your kind of the point at which you really grasp the client or the grant-giving organisation's attention. Say, yeah, I really understand this person, and I think they understand me as well. Moving on to the approach. So this section can be a bit dry, as Conrad said. It's quite often about a process, but it does have to be clear. You have to describe a clear theory or a plan, and you have to link back to the hooks that you've already set up. So I'm using this technique or this approach because I understand that you've got these issues. Highlighting the benefits, as Conrad has talked about, is a much better way of describing your approach than just creating a list of tasks that you're going to go through. So yeah, you may have to list the tasks, the application may require you to, but I think there's nothing to stop you highlighting, and I think this will have the following benefit to you. We've talked briefly about the solution. You have to be able to describe the solution, and it's very different to the approach. Don't overcomplicate the messages. If you can use visuals to describe your solution, perhaps you can do it in a single picture. I've seen that done really, really effectively. Moving on to the capability. So this is really you justifying why your organisation are the right people to either receive this money or deliver these services. So that's your track record of success of winning similar work, and the experience that perhaps you personally or the rest of your organisation have that is relevant to this application. Budget and impact, obviously, a necessary part of the proposal. If you can try to move away from kind of raw numbers and demonstrate value for money, rather than this is what it's going to cost you. Even better if you can use that using figures. Quite difficult to do sometimes, but if you think there's some kind of return on investment, that can be useful to highlight. I think you should also highlight to the grant-giving organisation or company that you're trying to pitch work to the risk. So be realistic about your budget. Where do you feel that there is significant risk? How well formed is the budget? How confident are you in it? If you can highlight all of that up front, it'll not only give some clarity to the reader around the fact that you've thought through your budget carefully, but it helps to elicit trust, because if you can highlight your own flaws as you see them in your budget, then I think that helps them kind of build a bit more of a trusting relationship with you because you've been so clear with them. And finally, there's the close. So yeah, what you want to do in the close really is appear committed. So I think be sincere, but make absolutely sure that you get across the message that you are the right people to do this work. Some people include references or testimonials in their close. That's quite a good place to do it. I'm going to talk briefly now about a slightly different type of close. So quite often we're asked to close a piece of work by pitching for it. And quite often we think we're at the close stage, we pitch, and then we go back to another stage, some way back up that stack where actually the client's articulated a slightly different need or asked you to come back and do some other thinking. So what if I have to pitch? Now we could talk for quite a long time about giving presentations and articulate kind of PowerPoint type presentations and how you do that. And I don't think there's really a silver bullet, but what is absolutely clear is that if you're asked to pitch, you must rehearse. So you will have probably seen some extremely confident, competent presenters. If you watch some of the TED Talks on the internet, I'm often kind of amazed at how clear and compelling those presentations are. I absolutely guarantee you that everybody who is and has been a successful presenter or pitcher will have rehearsed. The amount that you need to rehearse might decrease as you get better and better at it, but there is just no excuse really for entering a pitch or a presentation without rehearsing. And even if you go off script during the pitch itself, it'll give you some confidence that you at least know how the other participants, if there are other participants pitching with you, are going to react. So just briefly, practically, what can you do to make sure that you get value out of a rehearsal? So do plan your timings, your seating positions, your entry and your exits. So just having clarity around how long the thing's going to last, where you're each going to sit. Are you going to kind of mix yourselves up amongst the customer or the grant-giving organisation's people, or are you all going to sit in a row? Are you going to leave at the same time? Who's going to talk to who? Agree a set of questions, agree an approach to questions. So quite often we get into a pitch and you start to pitch your idea, and kind of 20 seconds in, someone interjects with a question. You really need an approach to handle that. Are you going to park all questions to the end, or are you going to leave it quite open and risk not getting through some of the things that you have to say? So make sure everybody in the room knows what you're going to do with questions. Consider a pure Q&A dialogue. I think we quite often take in too much material to a pitch, and we've got a fixed agenda that if we've got an hour presentation, we're going to get through our hours worth of material. Sometimes it can work quite well if you distill your material down into 15 or 20 minutes, and then just build your own Q&A and let the client kind of ask questions in response to your questions that you've already come up with. Particularly if you know the client quite well, and if you've got some kind of relationship with them already, there's less and less value in preparing lots and lots of material to talk through with them. Suggest an approach or a structure to the client up front. So, if the client's asked you to pitch, there's no reason why you can't test what you're going to pitch to them with them. So, hey, we were thinking about following agenda. We were going to cover the following. Does that work for you? It's quite nice to be asked, what for your input as a client, I expect. And I think there's no reason why you can't do that. The worst that can happen is they don't respond. If it's a very formal presentation, they say, you have to follow the structure, but there's no harm in asking. Make it really clear who's going to take each role, who's on which side, who's doing what and when. I think that's fairly obvious. Plan from the PA team, or your team in this case, who is going to focus on engaging each other person in the room. And really obvious little tip here, sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek at the end, but if you're up against other people, you might have a quick look through the sign-in sheet at reception to see who's been there before you. It's quite a good way of finding out who your competition are. So we're bang on 45 minutes now. I've actually got, there's a number of tips at the back of this pack, but I believe that Marika will send this pack out to you afterwards, and they're fairly kind of straightforward, obvious tips that will just help you. So I don't intend to go through each of these tips now, given the time that we've got. Are we okay to move straight to Q&A, Marika?
Hi, Adam. Thank you. Thanks to both you and Conrad. Really great. Yes, we can move on to questions. So I know I've got a couple here already that has been sent while we've been talking, but now everyone, please do have a think. If you've got any questions, do type them in and we'll try and cover as many as we can. And then if there are some burning ones that we don't cover, then let's see if we can get answer to those after we finish the webinar. Now, let me just read this. There's quite a long one here, so let me just read this for myself first. Now here's a very relevant one for many early stage social entrepreneurs. So Rick is asking, we often get very positive responses following our pitches, but the question they are most often asked is, who are you currently working with? But we are still trying to win our first paying customer. So how do you have any advice as to how to respond to that? So if you really are, taking those first steps.
So it's Conrad here, so I'll have two thoughts on that, and Adam may add them. I guess the first would be, depending on how they phrase the question, the more you can draw down on other similar work, other previous work, other associated work that you're doing, that can offer a credible enough answer. I mean, clearly you need to be honest and truthful, but you can package that up in a way that actually, if you think about what the client's asking, why are they asking that question? They're probably asking it because they maybe want a bit more understanding of the capability that your organisation brings, the skills, the confidence of your ability to do something, and therefore just trying to break out, not necessarily just answering the question, but understanding why they're asking that question, which might lead you to being able to answer it slightly differently. The other idea, and we do this sometimes ourselves, when we're trying to get into a new market, sometimes the best thing is you do the first piece of work for free. Now, again, I don't know the context here, but sometimes, rather than spending lots of money on marketing, actually just going along and doing the work almost at a no cost or base cost gives you that track record. If it is really key that the client is absolutely going to look for some track record, that you can then use that and present the next time that you've actually got a credible track record. Now, yes, did the client pay for it? No, but was that really their issue? I suspect their question is really, can you demonstrate that you can deliver on this? And therefore, if you've demonstrated you can deliver on this, whether the organisation paid for it up front or not is possibly not as relevant.
I think that, yeah, and to build on Conrad, I mean, another technique that you can use as well to try and avoid them asking that question is make it feel like you started the work. So, if you've already perhaps started work on the client solution, or you make it feel during the pitch that actually you've gone a bit further than just proposing the solution, you can quite often skip that stage because they realise you've got some credibility and capability because you've been able to get that far. I mean, that's quite a good way to win business in general, but particularly if you're struggling with track record. I quite often start work before I've received check or the signature, so to speak, because there's just something in establishing credibility, which is what Conrad has said this is all about, which is effectively what they're trying to do. And there's nothing more credible than starting the work and showing that you can do it.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Another question, how do you find out the budget that a customer might have? Do you have any techniques or tips for teasing this out?
So I'm happy to start on that one, Con, I think. So, well, to be quite candid, sometimes I just ask them, so how much have you got to spend in this area? Another way of doing it is asking how much they spend on something else, perhaps something similar. So, if it's a software application that you're trying to sell or something like that, you can say, well, what do you spend in this area for this particular product? And do you have a similar thing in mind? I think it can be quite a difficult question to ask, but I think the more open you are with it, the better in some circumstances.
Yeah.
You've got a better answer than that.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. Just ask the question honestly. There's no harm in doing that. Don't feel embarrassed to do it, because it's a sense of how big they think this is and how important. Two other kind of other points that might help. Ideally, if you're having a conversation early enough with the client, you can actually shape what the budget should be. So I talked about that sort of, idea generation, interest, intent. The earlier you get into the conversation at the idea and interest stage, the more able you are to influence the budget and actually suggest what it should be, rather than the budget being set after, sort of before you've been involved. The second thing, and I appreciate this is different often between public and private sector, but very often the client's not that sure what the budget should be, and I find that the best situation is when you can really focus in on value. So coming back to my view about explicit need, if you can quantify and demonstrate the value of an intervention, then actually the budget becomes far less relevant, because as long as the budget's less than the value, why wouldn't they do it?
Great, thank you. Hopefully that helps. Then the next question. Is stressing the negative impact of not buying a product or service a bad idea, a bad strategy? Is stressing the negative impact of not buying a product or service a bad strategy?
Yeah, again, it probably might help to get a bit more context, as I'm just trying to understand that. But I would go back to that SPIV approach. So I think, getting back to what's the implied need and explicit need, if you've got that really clear, and therefore you do think that the client not doing something will be really detrimental to them, then I think that's fine. So I think there are times when you could play the, I think some, I hope I'm not. I'd hate to be in your shoes when you tell your boss you've decided not to do this. I wouldn't go quite that far, but there is something about making them very clear about the implication of not doing something, because oftentimes it's very easy to not make a decision, and therefore trying to quantify the cost of not doing something. It isn't a bad approach, but having said all that, generally speaking, I would be far more keen to focus on the positive rather than avoiding of a negative.
I think it's a very risky strategy. I think I'd only do it if I was absolutely certain the client would agree with me. So if you've got a list of things that you've written down, reasons why the client, sorry, I'm going to get this wrong, but so the impact of the client or whoever you're pitching to not doing what you're asking them to do, if you can't go down that list and be absolutely certain they're going to agree with you, I wouldn't bother, because it'll be quite embarrassing if they sort of come back and say, well, it'll be more than embarrassing. You lose credibility because they just don't agree with you, just don't agree with your list.
Yeah.
So I think you can only do it if you've been through the early stages of the process, as Conrad said, and you absolutely know that a person is going to agree with you.
Just one other. I mean, we could have covered a whole set of other tools and techniques in this seminar. One of the ones that I suspect people often hear about is different types of buyers. So you might have the kind of economic buyer, you might have influencers, you might have procurement people who are more the technical buyers. What I often find is that when I get clients asking what might seem difficult or odd questions, they're not necessarily asking them for their purpose. They're often trying to get good answers to go to other people that might hold the budget. So that might also come in as well, that helping people to convince others in the organisation that this is a good thing can often be quite a useful route through trying to get, again, helping the client buy the services by removing the blockers that are actually internal for them.
Great, thank you. couple of questions that sound very similar to me, so I'll take them together. So I think different wording. Any tips on how to get your foot in the door, and what's the best way to approach a potential client? So I guess I'm assuming that the scenario is that you don't really have a contact that you know and you can go to. So how would you go about making that first step?
Yeah, there's lots of books around this sort of area that, again, we could have mentioned. There's one that's quite kind of Americanish, but it's called Never Eat Alone, and it's all about one person's particular experience of using others as a way of building their own personal network and essentially getting in front of clients. We get people to read a number of different books and then compare and contrast, and I know feedback from some people is that they find it a little bit too Americanized, but I think there is a message in there which is, don't be afraid to use your contacts to help you build and get in front of other people that you want to talk to. My personal experience, and clearly it depends on what you're pitching, the sort of work you're pitching, but the sort of buyers who buy the sort of consulting services we offer are pretty senior, they're pretty busy. The likelihood of them responding to a cold call is really low, in my experience, really low. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's really low. The likelihood of them picking up, even if it's a kind of LinkedIn recommendation or a friend of a friend, but anything that you can use to build a relationship and use the contact, another contact to get in front of that person, in my experience, is far more likely to pay off.
Yeah, I agree. I think I know the caveat, Malika, was if you haven't got a contact, but I think it is really difficult. This is one of those, there are no silver bullets. And if there was, then those who knew would be doing it. It does slightly depend what you're trying to sell, because obviously if you have a product, then you already know the kind of, as Conrad would say, the features and advantages of your product, and therefore why it might be applicable and benefit an organisation. If you're trying to sell a service, I think it's very, very difficult to do without having contacts in an organisation.
Great, thanks.
Sorry that we haven't given you the silver bullet there.
No, thank you for that. I think that might answer a question actually that I have here waiting as well, which is it worth investing budget into lists of contacts, email shots, advertising online and or print? What things should a startup social enterprise consider, I guess, in reaching out their customers?
I mean, for me, it's all about networking. I think the sort of, again, it depends on what you're selling, and if it's a really clear product, then maybe, print material works. But I would just encourage people to network, to use the contacts, use LinkedIn, make connections on LinkedIn. I think that's a far, far more fruitful way. And then, then you can start having conversations with it. Oh, when I was talking to so-and-so last week, they were saying this, I was in so-and-so 3 weeks ago. There's very, very rarely do I have a meeting where I don't think I've got some value out of it. Even if it doesn't kind of directly link to a sale or directly lead to an opportunity, just having contact with people, that's where I would go. People buy from people, as Adam said. And it's a people, certainly services, it's a people business. So I would encourage people to go to as many networking events, special interest groups, going along to presentations, anything that just can get their own network expanded, meet people, follow up, get them to introduce you to other people. That would be my advice.
And yeah, I agree. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have some kind of approach to doing that. So if you are trying to target a particular organisation, then perhaps you can have a look at the list of conferences where they'll be present. You have to have an approach, because I'm sure that if you wanted to, you could go to networking events and dinners every night of the week. You've got to decide whether there's any value in you being there, and often a way to do that is to work out whether the person or the organisation you're targeting is going to be there in some capacity and you're going to get a chance to speak to them. So we often get invited to conferences and webinars and things like that, and you've really got to qualify them quite carefully. There's so much going on. You can start with a long list and quickly get down to a few that you're really going to put some effort into.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And I'm mindful of the time now. It's now 1 o'clock, so I think we're going to have to call it a day there. Now, thank you again, Adam and Conrad. Thanks for sharing. I know it's always a challenge when we do these webinars to try and pass on what you know in 45 minutes. So thank you for giving it a try. And hopefully everyone's find this really valuable. I know there are some questions we haven't been able to answer, so apologies to those of you who asked the question, but we just ran out of time. So,
and if people want to send, I don't know whether people can send questions offline, but again, I'm sure Adam and I are both happy to maybe respond offline if people have got really burning questions they've not been able to get an answer to.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sure people will take you up on that offer, so we will we'll make sure that that happens if people still have some questions left. So huge thank you for everyone for dialing in and listening. Hope you find this useful, and I'll follow up with a recording afterwards. Yeah, thank you, Adam and Conrad again.
You're very welcome, and best of luck to everyone.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.